It is the autumn of 1940, and Britain is drowning in fear. The nightly bombing runs have turned London's skyline into a cathedral of fire. Families sleep in underground stations. Shop fronts wear their shattered glass like badges. And somewhere in the city, in a terraced house, a boarding room, perhaps a quiet corner table of a public house, a German spy is watching, listening, and waiting to radio his findings back across the channel. Picture one of those pubs on a grey Tuesday evening. The barman pulls pints with the mechanical efficiency of a man who has done it 10,000 times. A wireless set crackles somewhere behind the bar. Men in overcoats lean against the counter. Darts thump into a board near the window. And in the far corner, nursing a half of bitter he has made last 40 minutes, sits a man who does not quite belong. He speaks English well enough. His papers are in order. His cover story is plausible. He has been trained by the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, for months. He has memorized streets, memorized faces, memorized the kind of small talk that oils conversation in a British pub. He believes himself invisible. He is not. Within weeks, sometimes days, he will be sitting in a room in Wandsworth Prison or Brixton or Camp 020 in Ham, Surrey, being questioned by men who know things about him that they should have no possible way of knowing. His network, if he has one, will be rolled up. His handler will be fed false information for months, sometimes years, without ever suspecting a thing. By the end of the war, every single German spy sent to Britain will have been caught, turned, or eliminated. Every single one. It is one of the most complete intelligence victories in recorded history. And while the full story has many parts, brilliant analysts, a remarkable double-cross system, and some extraordinarily reckless German tradecraft, the foundation beneath all of it was something so simple that it sounds almost laughable when stated plainly. The British learned to look at how a spy ordered a drink. To understand why that matters, you have to understand just how serious the German espionage threat was believed to be in the summer and autumn of 1940. After the fall of France in June of that year, Britain stood alone. The Wehrmacht was massed on the coast of occupied Europe. Operation Sea Lion, the planned German invasion of the British Isles, was being actively developed. For an invasion to succeed, Germany needed intelligence. It needed to know where RAF squadrons were stationed, where coastal defenses were weakest, where troops and armor were concentrated, and how civilian morale was holding. The Abwehr needed agents on the ground. Between September 1940 and the end of that year, more than 20 agents were dispatched to Britain, most arriving by parachute, some by boat, a handful through neutral countries like Spain, Portugal, and Sweden. They carried wireless sets, invisible ink, code books, and false identity documents. They had been briefed extensively on British culture, geography, and social customs. MEI-5, Britain's domestic counterintelligence service, was acutely aware of this threat and catastrophically under-resourced to meet it. In 1939, the entire service had fewer than 30 officers. The expansion was rapid but chaotic. The question of how to identify enemy agents against the backdrop of a nation of 47 million people, millions of whom were refugees, evacuees, servicemen, and displaced civilians from across Europe, seemed all but unanswerable. The Germans believed they had prepared their agents thoroughly. Language training was intensive. Maps of British cities were studied. Cultural briefings covered everything from the British class system to the etiquette of public houses. There had even been efforts to expose agents to British food, British humour, and British complaining, the last of which, one imagines, required no instruction at all. What the Germans had not fully accounted for was the extraordinary granularity of British social habit. Not the big customs, the tiny ones. The ones so small, so reflexive, so deeply ingrained that no amount of classroom preparation could reliably reproduce them. The ones that a lifetime of living in Britain instills without anyone ever stating them as rules, because they are not rules at all. They are simply the way things are done. And pubs, it turned out, were the perfect arena in which those instincts were exposed. The insight did not come from a single moment of genius. It emerged gradually from the debriefings of court agents, from the interrogation records compiled at Camp 020 under the formidable Lieutenant Colonel Robin Stevens, a man known to his staff as Tin Eye on account of his monocle, and from the accumulated observations of experienced MI5 officers who noticed again and again the same categories of error appearing in the accounts of captured spies. Camp 020, formerly known as Latchmere House, was the primary interrogation centre for enemy agents captured on British soil. Stevens ran it with a rigour bordering on obsession, and his records, declassified in the decades since the war, provide a remarkable window into how German agents consistently betrayed themselves. The errors were rarely dramatic. They were mundane, achingly, almost comically mundane. An agent might count his change differently from the way a Briton would, the German habit being to work upwards from the price to the amount tendered, rather than simply scooping up whatever was given. He might fold his newspaper the wrong way, or hold his knife and fork in subtly unfamiliar configurations. He might use the wrong register of informality when addressing a stranger, too formal in some contexts, too familiar in others. He might thank a barman at the wrong moment, or not at all, or with a slight excess of punctiliousness that no regular drinker would bother with. The pub, specifically, was a masterclass in British behavioural code, the order in which a man arrived at the bar and waited to be served, the way he caught the barman's eye, or deliberately avoided doing so, in the English fashion that suggested patience and self-sufficiency rather than impatience. Whether he paid immediately or ran a tab, whether he engaged strangers in conversation, and, crucially, whether he did so in the British manner, which is to say, by pretending for a considerable time that he had no interest in doing so at all, before arriving sideways at conversation through a series of non-committal observations, usually about the weather, the war, or the quality of the beer. These behaviours were not written down anywhere. They could not be taught from a manual. They were the residue of a culture that had been forming itself in public houses for centuries, and they were, in their quiet way, as distinctive as a fingerprint. If you're finding this story interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The German response to the problem of behavioral exposure was limited, partly because the Abwehr never fully understood how thoroughly their agents were being identified and turned. The double-cross system, run by MI5's 20 committee, so named because 20 in Roman numerals is XX, a double cross, ensured that captured agents were either imprisoned or, more usefully, turned to work as double agents feeding false intelligence back to Berlin. Because the Abwehr was receiving what appeared to be operational reports from agents in the field, they had little reason to suspect that those agents had been compromised. The system was so effective that by the later years of the war, virtually every German agent operating in Britain was either in British custody or actively working under British control. The Abwehr, in effect, had become a subsidiary of MI5 without knowing it. The Germans did attempt to improve their cultural preparation. Later agents showed evidence of more sophisticated briefings. Some had clearly been coached on specific British habits, but the coaching was always too broad, too general, and too rigid. British social behaviour is not a set of rules to be memorised. It is a living thing, improvisational and contextual, and it shifts constantly in ways that only the habitual participants can follow intuitively. American intelligence, by contrast, faced different challenges. The Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, predecessor to the CIA, operated primarily in occupied Europe rather than domestically, and their agents faced the inverse problem. Americans had to pass as Europeans, which raised its own set of cultural hurdles. The British problem of identifying foreign agents on home soil was somewhat unique, and the solution, a deep, almost anthropological understanding of the behavioral landscape of ordinary British life, was also unique to the British context. The Germans never cracked it. They never mounted a sustained or effective espionage network on British soil throughout the entire course of the war. The historical impact of this counterintelligence achievement is difficult to overstate, though it is equally difficult to measure with precision, since so much of what was prevented can never be fully quantified. What can be said with confidence is this: the double-cross system, built on the foundation of these systematic captures, produced some of the most consequential deceptions of the entire war. Operation Fortitude, the vast and elaborate campaign to convince the Germans that the D-Day landings would target the Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy, depended entirely on the credibility of double agents whose positions had been secured by the early identification and turning of German spies. The information fed to German commanders through these double agents in the weeks before and after June 6, 1944, persuaded Adolf Hitler to hold his panzer reserves in position rather than committing them to Normandy in the critical first hours of the invasion. Military historians have argued with considerable force that this decision alone may have determined the outcome of the Normandy campaign, and therefore, arguably, of the war in Western Europe. At the root of that chain of events, the small, quiet, unglamorous work of watching how a stranger behaved at a bar. The story of this intelligence victory is preserved in part through the declassified records of Camp 020 and the 20 Committee, some of which are available at the National Archives in Kew. The work of MI5 officers like Guy Liddell, Roger Masterman, and the agents of the double-cross system is documented in a body of historical literature that has grown substantially since the official secrets surrounding these operations began to be released in the 1970s and 1980s. Masterman's own account, The Double-Cross System, published in 1972, remains one of the most valuable primary sources available to the general reader. Return now to that pub in the autumn of 1940. The man in the corner has finished his beer. He sets the glass down. He stands. He buttons his coat. He pauses, just for a moment, before leaving a tip on the table that is either too generous or not quite right. It is hard to say which, but something about it is slightly off, and the barman glances up with the particular expression of mild puzzlement that Britons deploy when something is not quite what they expected, which is an expression almost indistinguishable from no expression at all. And that is the point. Outside, the blackout has turned the street into pure darkness. The man walks quickly. He has a report to compose, an aerial to erect in the upstairs room of his lodgings, a schedule of transmissions to keep. He believes the evening has gone well. He has made, perhaps, 4 or 5 small errors. He has folded a banknote in a way no Englishman folds a banknote. He has hesitated half a second too long before choosing whether to stand at the bar or find a table. He has responded to a barman's offhand remark with a directness that is technically friendly but textually foreign. And he has, at some point during the evening, been observed by someone who will not remember him consciously, but whose instincts have registered that something is not right about this man, and who will say something to someone, and that someone will say something to someone else. Within a fortnight, there will be men standing outside his lodgings. Within a month, he will be sitting across a table from Robin Stevens in a house in Ham, Surrey, listening to the sound of his own silence. Germany sent spies to Britain by the score. Britain sent none back. Every network was broken. Every agent was caught or controlled. An entire apparatus of military intelligence was fed, for years, a carefully curated diet of lies, lies that shaped strategy, repositioned armies, and very possibly changed the outcome of the war. And it began in a pub, with a pint that was not quite ordered correctly. The Germans, for all their preparation, had forgotten the first rule of espionage. It is not the great gestures that betray you. It is always the small ones.